All right.
Perfect.
All right, there we go. Okay. So hello, everyone. So today I'm going to talk to you about how long-term biodiversity data from museum collections can reveal links between, can reveal links between macroecological gradients in biotic interactions and broad biodiversity patterns. I'm going to turn off my video because the connection is a little off. Okay. There we go. All right, so let's move on. So one of the big challenges in ecology is to understand the global patterns of biodiversity, such as those that occur across macroecological gradients. So changes in the strength of biotic interactions have been proposed to play a role in shaping such patterns. For example, predation is known to be less frequent at higher elevations and latitudes, but it is unclear what are the consequences of such gradients in communities. So one of the best tools to study such questions is in what is, I think, perhaps the largest undertaking of long-term data sets in biology. And this is the recording of biodiversity in museum collections. You see that the largest and oldest collections in the world have been recording biodiversity data over centuries. And this is the case, for example, of the Smithsonian Institution or the Natural History Museum in London, among many other museums, right? So with this in mind, we took advantage of two 4,000 meter elevational gradients in the equatorial Andes and relied on museum collections in Ecuador to assess how changes in predation across elevations shape communities. And we looked at communities of invertebrates, particularly tree hoppers. So tree hoppers are a group that is very, very close to my heart. and they are mostly recognized by the incredible morphological diversity of their thorax, as you may see in this array of pictures. And believe me, Google them, you won't be disappointed. Some of these bugs are borderline science fiction, to be honest. But what is most important to this project is the diversity of tree hopper behavioral strategies, which involve a combination of various levels of maternal care, as we can see in the photograph on the left, and various levels of their propensity to engage in mutualistic associations with ants, as we can see on the right. Yeah. So these strategies are very closely associated with how a species adapt to predation. Okay. So tree hopper species associating with ants exhibit the classic ant-emipteran mutualism, where tree hoppers offer honeydew to the ants in exchange of obtaining their defensive services against other predators, right? As aphids in the backyard. Now, tree hoppers with maternal care, here mothers actively defend their brood against predators and parasitoids, as we can see in the video. And they use a combination of behaviors that range from simply sitting on top of their eggs or to sophisticated communication behaviors that help mothers engage predators with an array of attacks. Yeah. So we studied tree hopper anti-predator behaviors along the Andes elevational gradient, where communities are exposed to different levels of predation and availability of ant partners. And we expected tree hopper anti-predator investment to be proportional to the predation pressure they would encounter across elevations, and whether they invest in maternal care and mutualism would be dependent on the presence of ants. And so to do this, we identified the tree hopper communities occurring across elevations, and to do that, we used the QCAZ museum collection at La Pontificia Universidad Católica in Ecuador. And this collection has been recording Ecuadorian biodiversity for over 50 years. And it houses over 9,000 specimens of tree hoppers, including more than 500 species collected in over 400 locations all over Ecuador. So, and this is also an institution that is very close to my heart. I've worked there for many years. So this is what we did. So we used natural history information of species to assess the anti-predator investment of communities across elevations. And it is worth to mention that natural history, the collection of natural history is another one of the great the great efforts of long-term data collection. Since the dawn of humanity, we've been looking at plants and animals and just recording what they are doing. And in the case of tree hoppers, there is a big body of literature describing the behaviors and all natural history aspects of these animals. So, as I mentioned before, the anti-predator investment of tree hoppers revolves around strategies involving combinations of maternal care and mutualism at different life stages. And these strategies can be broadly categorized in the categories depicted in this table, right? So here, the rows depict the degree of investment in mutualism, ranging from no investment at the top, mutualism limited just to the nymphal stages at the middle, mutualism across all life stages at the bottom. And the columns, on the other hand, depict investment in maternal care, again, ranging from no investment at the left, maternal care limited to the egg stage in the middle, and maternal care of eggs and nymphs to the right. And we use this information to score each species overall anti-predator investment, and then assess the total anti-predator investment in the community. Okay, we also assess the ecological conditions tree hoppers encounter across elevations. We did do this by sampling, as I said, to 4,000-meter elevation gradients on the eastern and western slopes of Ecuador. And we used live fly baits to measure predation rates and the proportion of predation exerted by different predator types, right? And we also used sugary baits to measure the availability of mutually stands in the environment across elevations. Okay, so let's see. This is what we find. And this slide looks awful. Sorry about that. But the graph, we can see the graph. This graph depicts the probability of the baits being found by the ants per hour across elevations. And we can see that the availability of ant partners just declines very sharply with elevation. Now, with predation, the results are a little more interesting. Okay. So first of all, we can see that we found that predation rates on the live fly baits decrease with elevation, as we can see on the graph on the left. And this was mainly because a sudden decrease in ant predation, as we can see on the graph on the right. And the differential declines in these predation rates by different predator types led to a qualitative shift in predation across elevations. And this graph shows the proportion of predation exerted by different predator groups across elevations. And we can see that the ants were dominant predators below 1,500 meters, but got replaced by other predators above this elevation. Now, when we analyzed the types of anti-predator investment across elevations, we found a qualitative shift in investment. In this graph, bars represent the proportion of species exhibiting, of tree hopper species, right? Exhibiting different behavioral strategies within the community, right? So the legend at the right shows the color coding for the table depicting tree hopper anti-predator strategies that I described before. And here, more intense blue depicts increasing investment in mutualism, and more intense yellows depict increasing investment in maternal care. And we can see that communities at the lowlands are dominated by species relying in mutualism, right? But communities in the highlands, on the other hand, are mostly dominated by species that rely on maternal care, and it's all filled with yellow. So this showed that maternal care is, I think it's working as an alternative, right, as an alternative strategy to mutualism. As ants become less available at higher elevations, the species begin to rely more and more on maternal care. However, we have to address an elephant in the room, and this is that we have shown that ant tree hopper mutualism is most frequent in the lowlands, but we have also shown that in the lowlands, ants are the dominant predators of invertebrates. So it's kind of a paradox there. So, and in fact, 96% of the ants that predated upon our baits belong to species that are known to associate with the meat ants. So we tested whether tree hoppers invest on mutualism or maternal care, and whether this was most closely associated with ant predation or the ants' availability of mutualistic partners. And thank God, finally, there is a slide that looks okay. In this graph, we see in the y-axis the ratio of ant mutualism to maternal care investment within a tree-hopper community across elevations, meaning that the points that are closer to 1 represent communities where most of the investment went to ant mutualism rather than maternal care. And the opposite would be true for points that are closer to 0, where most investment goes to maternal care. So in the graph on the left, this is plotted as a function of the availability of ants in the environment. And we can see that despite there is a positive association, the fit it's a little off, right? On the graph on the right, on the other hand, investment is plotted as a function of how much of the total predation in the environment was exerted by the ants. And as we can see, the fit is nearly perfect. And I think this suggests that tree-hopper ant mutualism is acting actually more as a strategy to prevent predation from the ants themselves, rather than to obtain their defensive services against predation as against other predators, as it's usually understood, right? And this also shows that whether tree-hoppers invest in maternal care or ant mutualism is an adaptation to qualitative changes in predation across elevations. All right, so it's a cool result. Now this is even cooler result. we also found that the overall anti-predator investment in tree-hopper communities did not decrease at the same rate as predation rates across elevations, actually not at all. In this graph, we can see in the line in red that anti-predator investment decreased only above 2,500 meters. It decreased sharply. And this was despite an abrupt decrease in predation rates, which are virtually nothing above 1,500 meters, right? Almost, it looks like the curves are actually mirrored. So this pattern suggests that the low predation rates at high elevations are still ecologically relevant for the tree hoppers to justify in their communities this sustained anti-predator investment, right? But the story doesn't end there, because something happens above 2,500 meters that communities seem to not require to defend against predators anymore. Okay, so we think that this pattern could have raised because, okay, this is the thing with microecological gradients. Elevation is fundamentally a gradient of temperature and primary productivity, which are variables that are known to have universal effects in ectotherms across all trophic levels universally. So the metabolic theory of ecology predicts that lower temperature and productivity as those occurring at higher elevations should lead to lower predation rates, yes, but it should also limit at the very same rate the prey activity and their ability to replenish their numbers. So as elevation increases, the negative effects of predators and prey may actually cancel out. And so, but however, at the highest elevation, productivity may no longer be able to sustain a predator trophic level, and which may release tree hoppers from the need to invest against predation, and that's why we find this deep at the very highest elevations. Well, this is all I have to say for today. I hope you found the study interesting. Thank you for your attention. Well, I also want to thank all my collaborators and the funding agencies that made this study possible. And I'm sorry for all the glitches. I'm using a free version of PowerPoint. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Luis. What a fascinating set of studies and a great story. I have tons of questions, and I know Matthew has a few too, and I encourage our audience to also submit questions, but I'd like to start you off with, I was just thinking, so you showed that 3x3 diagram of all the possible strategies, and for a few of the boxes, we don't see species that have those levels of maternal care and mutualisms. And so I was curious if you could speculate on what might limit all of these possible strategies from evolving.
Yeah, I mean, of course, those boxes don't exist, or at least haven't been found in the field ever. The first obvious reason, I think, why they don't exist, for instance, the one that maternal care is present throughout the whole stages, and mutualism is present throughout those stages. Maybe that one doesn't exist because it's an overkill. Why so much investment? You need just enough, right? Then the other reason why I don't think there is the thing is that if mothers are there, there's no way they can avoid there's no way they can avoid ants unless ants are not present. That's why the few things that occur with maternal care at the lowlands have to be with yeah. But definitely to answer that question, there's so many things that yeah.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that yeah.
Thanks for speculating a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a question from Patrick Green. He asks, what is the range of a given tree hopper community, especially at middle altitudes? Could tree hoppers at higher elevations be holding on to anti-predator strategies from lower elevation, even if they don't need to?
Yeah, actually, the shift in tree hopper communities is actually, I would say, almost total every 1,000 meters, almost completely. Of course, there is always those species that have these ridiculous elevational gradients, but the ranges, but they are usually the ones that avoid to deal with maternal care and mutualism, are just hopping around like regular insects. So yeah, although I have thought about that idea, and it may tell part of the story, at least for some species. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Fascinating system. Okay, I think we'll finish up with one question from Matthew. So Matthew.
Well, I was just wondering, so, the classic story is that the ants are preventing other forms of predation. Are they still doing that? Is that story still true? It's just that the primary form of predation is from the ants?
Yeah, definitely the services are not mutually exclusive.
Okay.
This idea that the ants are actually the ones, the ant predation is the main services. I'm publishing around it, and I'm making some studies around it. And the thing is that it's kind of obvious, even if ant predation is not very high in an environment. If ants are predators, whether they are abundant or not, and if an ant is going to attend me, I have to first convince it not to eat me in the first place, right? And it's important to remember that the nipterans are they are not very mobile if they are feeding, because they are inserting their stylets on the plant. It's not like they can just, so it's very useful to not to have to move every time an ant finds you. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. We're going to move on to the next talk
Thank
now.
you.
I'm very